Welcome to the Change Your POV podcast. You're listening to Headspace and Timing, a show dedicated to breaking down the stereotypes of veteran mental health. I'm your host, Duane France. Let's get ready to make sure that your headspace and timing set correctly. Hey everybody, welcome to Headspace and Timing. If this is your first time listening, then thanks for checking us out. As many of you who serve know, the M2 machine gun, the 50 cal, is one of the greatest weapons in the military's arsenal. If the weapon's headspace and timing isn't set right, however, it's just a huge chunk of metal. Veterans can be rendered inoperable if their headspace and timing's not set correctly either. That's my mission here, to raise awareness about veteran mental health and reduce the stigma against seeking support. Each week we'll talk about different aspects of veteran mental health and interview mental health professionals that are working with veterans, service members, and their families around the country. Hey folks, it's Duane France, host of Headspace and Timing. Got an interesting show for you here today. One of my Change Your POV podcast network co-hosts, we'll say that 5 times fast, but Jeff Adamec is here, and wanted to talk to Jeff today, not as a mental health professional, but as a veteran who has experienced some things and has worked with mental health professionals. So I think that Jeff is going to bring a unique aspect to the show. So welcome, Jeff. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, Duane. I appreciate you having me on and giving me the opportunity to help get the word out about this. I mean, this is massively important. I think this is probably the cornerstone of what's most important about our dealing with veterans nowadays. And I say that not to suck up to your listeners or you. I say it because I really believe it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is a huge thing that's totally important, is to just get the message out there, like you said. So before we get started, how about you tell the audience a little bit about yourself? I know they listen to your show because nobody has any time but to listen to what we're saying. But in case they haven't, tell them some about what you've got going on.
My name's Jeff Adamec. I am 39 years old. I live in North Carolina. I served 18 years in the United States military, joining when I was 17. And in those 18 years, I went from being just a high school student to being an airborne medic, to being a ranger medic, to being a Green Beret, to being a Green Beret with PTSD, and then being a former Green Beret, medically retired, partially because of PTSD, and coming into the workforce.
Oh, so that's a lot of different stuff.
Well, I really want to put forth the statement of I became a Green Beret with PTSD, because I think that there's a problem with people admitting that they have it, and I make sure I say it as much as possible to people so that there's no stigma associated with it anymore. That's why I say that.
So, excuse me. So a lot of different times through your career, you say you became a Green Beret with PTSD. And again, not getting into specifics, but is there a certain point where you realize something had changed?
That I realized something changed, yes, but I was made aware later on from my wife, and that there was change slowly happening over time. I believe that there's experience you have where you suffer with symptoms of PTSD, but maybe not clinical PTSD. And this is all speculation on my part. This is Jeff Adamec's opinion, and he had a TBI, so we can all go with that. But I think that it came to a head when I couldn't come to grips with things that were outside of my control anymore. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
When I knew I was going back to Afghanistan, or Iraq, when I knew there was another deployment and I had something to look forward to, I was able to, cover up the symptoms that I was having, that a lot of guys have all the time, that weren't going away in the normal couple weeks after you get back from combat. After 10 years, you start to think that this is just the way life is.
Right.
Until it's no longer possible for you to live a quality of life because it's all that's happening to you.
Okay. Do you think that there was a time from before? I mean, can you clearly delineate it where there was a time maybe before the deployments where you were one way and then after a period of time looking back and you can see a shift?
Yeah, there was definitely a moment where coming back home and not getting back to I guess a baseline of normality of the kind of calm, easy, laid back guy that I used to be. It was not going back to normal as often as time went on. I was irritable more often. Never got violent, so never got to the point where I was being violent or anything like that with anybody. But the depression of being home, wanting to be back over there and not home. How could you not want to be home? When your wife and kids are there, you spend all your time over there wanting to get home to your wife and kids. You get back, and the second you step back foot on American soil, you're like, I got to get out of here and get back overseas.
Yeah, that's what I tell veterans that I work with all the time. It's like the beginning of Apocalypse Now, when Martin Sheen says that. When I was there, I wanted to be here, but when I was home, all I could think about was getting back in the jungle. And this is something that time out of mind that veterans have had to deal with.
Right, and with the misunderstanding and the misconceptions that I think PTSD, even still now, with people getting to the point where they're starting to understand it, with the misconceptions of that, it becomes such a scary thought to a person who is supposed to use their brain and their focus and their attention to detail on a day-to-day basis as a not just an NCO but a special operations NCO in a strategic role for the military, and very you don't have anyone to back up. Everything you do is on you. You start to have doubts as to whether or not you're okay. But then you quickly don't want to face those facts. And that I think ends up leading to worse things because you don't understand the actual process that's happening causing PTSD, because it's been drilled down our throat from General Patton on that this is something that only happens to cowards and weaklings. And so it's just and I'm guilty of, when I was a younger guy, and I'm just as guilty of being one of those guys that thought PTSD was something that only happened to cowards. And it changes real quick when you start to have it and you're not a coward. You're not afraid. The symptoms you have, the feelings you have are not fear. But I think it looks like fear to other people.
Sure. And I think that's just showing that is a challenge. Now, something specific for you, Jeff, and I'm interested. Did you have deployments while you were not in Special Forces? When you were a Ranger medic, did you deploy, or did you go to selection and then all your deployments were after?
I had been to selection. I was in phase 1, which is the SUT phase, or the SF version of Ranger School, when 9/11 happened. So my very first combat deployment was the invasion of Iraq.
Okay, yeah. And that's something that I've seen, and I know you and I have talked about it, but the majority of my career was spent in light infantry support, but I finished out in 10th Group for the last 2.5 years. But Special Forces soldiers are selected for a certain level of resilience. That's what selection does, is not weed out. It's a very difficult school. It's challenging. I get all that, but you're selected because you have a certain level of physical, mental, emotional resilience, and then then that is developed to an even greater degree. And so, what I've seen, not being a Green Beret myself, is that some of the aspect of being a Green Beret is either that natural or that inclination to be trained for resilience and kind of resisting some of this stuff. Would you agree?
I'd absolutely agree. And those who have not been through selection, or listeners who are not even in the military, you have to understand that selection is far more than just taking someone and pushing them to the physical limits. They're testing you out there with psychology tests, making sure that you're able to stay focused and do everything. Are you there?
I am. Yes.
Okay. I had that. Whatever you had, I just had that dropout sound. Okay. Anyway, so they're not just testing you for physical ability. They're testing you for drive, will, intelligence, psychological stability, psychological testing to see what kind of a personality you have. You can see these things in the tests they give you and the stuff that they're doing. It's all meant to mix together. They have psychologists that work out at selection, that their job is to decide whether or not somebody is fit. And it's not fit because they're not mentally capable. It's a certain type of mentality and a certain type of personality that they're looking for. And it's someone who naturally critically thinks, but naturally is intelligent, someone who can follow orders and be a good soldier, but also wants to think outside the box. And that's the best way I could put it, because I'm not a psychologist. I didn't work behind those little double glass doors making decisions on people. But I did see guys that completely had me convinced that they had every right to be there, either quit on day one of team week or not get selected at all at the end for some unknown reason. And that unknown reason had to have come from one of those psychological reasons, or something that, was transparent to the rest of us.
Sure, and that's something that, again, and that goes into resilience as an internal, value or ability. Some people have it innately. It can be learned. It can be taught. But that's really, on the psychological sense, that's what selection is that's a separator. And then as you go on through, Q course and everything else is Green Berets are taught, your resilience is expanded. And then, especially with the high op tempo, even that level of resilience can be tested. What I like to say, especially with a lot of the SF guys that I work with, is it takes them a long time to explode, but when they do explode, they leave a big crater, and there's usually casualties.
Right, because they've been holding it. They've been holding in the micro explosions for so long that you can only build up so much energy, and when it finally comes out, it's like a person who's dealing with death that hasn't gotten to the acceptance stage, and they're holding it out, and then they finally have this big breakdown, and they're sobbing, and it's months or years after the person died, but now they deal with it. It's the same idea, that it's like a supernova that, that's holding it in for millions of years until it's getting just to the end of its ability to hold its own power, and boom, it goes off. I wanted to ask if you had heard, because I thought about it while we were talking at the end of it, I've heard this before, and I want to know if you've heard it and whether or not it's actually true, but there is a tendency in special operations for the guys who are in it to come from, and this is just a percentage-wise, come from bad backgrounds, like have bad childhoods, or childhoods where there was, childhood nobody wanted. Like there was either abuse, or they were, had no parents, or they were adopted. I've heard before that there's a high level of that in SF and just special ops as a whole. And I was wondering if you'd ever heard that, and if you had heard it, if you know if it's true.
Well, I think that there is a large, you're talking about a representative sample in that a lot of soldiers, a lot of service members come from that kind of background.
Right.
The military is as much a running from as it is a running to. You can even consider that young military spouses are really doing the same thing. Hey, I want to get out of my small town, or I want to get out of my area. And so the easiest way is for me to marry a Marine or marry a soldier. And so you have these two young kids who may not have been from the best kind of background, who really don't understand how to have a relationship, and then you throw in military life on top of it. And so I think, you have a lot of people have different reasons for joining the military, and then taking that next step and going into special operations really is a very deliberate next step. It's very easy to kind of raise your hand, going airborne and things like that. But then to take the next step, it's a very deliberate next step to go through the selection process, to decide to go to selection, to decide to continue to move forward. Nobody would have faulted you, Jeff, if you would have stayed in Ranger Bat. They would have said, hey, it's, you would have done more than most kind of thing. And yet you decided to take that next step. And so I don't know if there's anything inherently psychological in which, those trying to outpace the past or prove anything like that. I've not heard anything specifically with Special Forces, but I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case.
Yeah, and just to be clear, it's no indication on my childhood. It was just something I heard, and I was wondering, because I had a theory that you're either somebody who is naturally just driven to be great, or you're somebody that's trying to prove something to the universe or some unknown thing, to be guys like us who are constantly looking for some other challenge and are never satisfied. with what we get. And that's a good thing. I don't think that's a character flaw. I think having a drive to excel all the time is great as long as it's tempered with an appreciation of humanity and common sense and not being a megalomaniac. Because if you put both of those together, then you come up with guys like Hitler or Stalin, and that's dangerous. But when you temper it with a person who's truly a good person who just has a drive to excel for their own benefit or for the benefit of something bigger than themselves, that is where I think most of the world's special forces come from, and even the world's militaries that are volunteer. Every single person that joins the army joins because they want to be there or because they think they don't have another choice. But when you get in, the next time you enlist, if you ever stay in longer than your first term, you're doing that because you want to be there, not because you feel like you have to. So there are guys who join because they have to, and then they stay. And I think those guys have developed into that mentality through the military's process of teaching you how to be an adult, a productive adult. Well, but I think so I don't think anyone. There's a lot of people that get in, and they're like, "Oh, this person just got in because he wanted to get away from his life." After 4 years, if he wasn't happy with his life, he's not going to be happy with the army because the army is not easy. It's a challenge to be in. So they'll run back out again. So I always try to make sure that anyone knows that I have as much respect for a cook in First ID who's barely making rank as I do for a guy in Delta Force.
Well, and I think something that you said is very critical. It's at the point of which someone is comfortable with what they're doing. I mean, and this is something that you and I haven't talked about, but there were certain paths in my career that I very much could have made a different decision. This is not soft envy, although that exists. But when I was in the 82nd, I was a squad leader. My team leader, Dale, he and I, that was when the star was still in the Q course. And so he passed selection, but had a little bit of challenge in the star. And so he went back to the line for a little bit until his Q came back again. And Dale and I, again, squad leader, team leader, he was saying, "Hey, why don't you try out for selection? Why don't you do this?" And I was very content with what I was doing as far as being a leader and a teacher and a non-commissioned officer. It wasn't that I didn't want to excel. That was a different path that ultimately I decided. I considered it, and then decided, you know what? No, I'm okay with where I'm at, and this career field, so to speak, needs leaders and stuff too. So I think that's something that you hit on was. It's something that either I want to excel or maybe I'm not comfortable where I'm at. Again, you knew guys in as Rangers that were perfectly happy being in Ranger Bat that had maybe there was a thought about going to selection, but they preferred to be a Ranger kind of thing.
I know guys I was in Ranger Bat with that never left and are one of the I have more respect for than some people that are my heroes. You know what I mean? Like they stayed there and they did great, wonderful things. And I have no guys that stayed in the 82nd that never left there that fall into the same category. And that's why I really believe it. And they go out of their way in selection when they're letting people go for non-quitting or for any reason. They tell them that this isn't a hit on your person and your ability to do anything. What we do is very, very isolated to a small portion of the world. Mentally and physically what you can do. And so it's not for everyone. And I agree with you. I think that had you gone knowing yourself that I'll do it, it's a good idea. If that would have – you would have been day two of Team Week, you would have been like, screw this. I mean, and that doesn't make you weak. It just means that you have to almost I can't go back to what I was doing before.
And that goes – and there are a lot of people I would imagine that in – I believe, that I would have said, I would have stuck through it or whatever. But yeah, I knew guys that were selected that went through selection that weren't selected. I knew a guy that went through like 3 times and he was finally selected on the 3rd time. Okay, brother.
So do I. I know a guy that I'm in group with that I was in the 82nd with who had that 3-time selection, and that to me is that's a guy who wants to be there.
Yeah, no, and he was, but then you and as we're talking about this process and the way in which special operations forces are selected and things like that, and then you get it drilled into your head, the elite of the elite of the elite, and then you have the fact that you come to the point where, to the breaking point, essentially, and almost literally. Do you think that leads to or contributes to the stigma, not just in the military, but specifically within the soft community, against admitting weakness, if that's what you want to call it, or psychological concerns?
It absolutely does. I mean, I could say that without, as a person who went through it. I mean, we also, not only do we get drilled in that we're elite, we're also well aware that the Army pays us a professional bonus for being professional military. You know, the pro pays that come in there is for, only drill sergeants, recruiters, and SF guys get that pay. And it's considered a profession, a 100% profession. So you get that. And then what comes with that is this constant reminder that you are an example to everyone else of what it is to be a professional soldier. And on top of that, the best, the top of the professional soldiers by being, special operations. Kennedy, John Kennedy, when he awarded the Green Beret, made comment of, the Green Beret is a symbol of excellence that should be striven to, and made everyone should look to that as the example of how to be. So when you have that, everyone who's got kids understands that when you tell your kid not to do something that you've done, it's not because you're being a hypocrite. It's because you're setting an example to them of what's right and wrong. Regardless of what I've done wrong, you're supposed to be better than me. So do that. Now you apply that to having signs and symptoms of PTSD and resiliency and instilling confidence in your brothers left and right of you and the people below you that you're okay to get the job done when you want to do it. And it starts to become a problem, not an asset at some point. The things that make us who we are that are great eventually lead to what we're talking about with guys really, holding it in too long and then it, becomes a massive issue.
Right, and that's something that even, again, as I witnessed in the last 2.5 years that I spent with 10th Group, is that it was almost like Russian nesting dolls. It was within our compound, within our ring of hills, we really didn't give a crap about what was going on main post on Carson. It was a totally different world.
Right.
Whereas even on a military basis, we're not really concerned about what's going off post because, our backs are to the fence. Here at Carson, our backs were to the hills, and even as far down as within the battalions, within the team rooms, everybody was focused inwards, and not in a negative way of trying to cover up, but just trying to maintain a certain level of image, if not the expected level of professionalism.
Right. Well, I mean, let's be honest. The regular military. And we've all seen them. The leaders in the regular military they have an issue with special operations. They don't like us, and that's nothing. I understand why, but we have to isolate ourselves. A, because we have a job that requires isolation for security reasons, and B, because we don't have time to spend all day explaining to some post-sergeant major why we've got guys out wearing sneakers and hats in the woods while we're doing training, especially when we have we don't have time to stop training to explain to you, mind your own business. We've got a job to do that's National Command Authority, and we're allowed to do this. And we're just, it's distracting from training and from what we need to be doing. So we have to create a separation only because it is two different jobs. I mean, I would go as far to say, and I'm sure you agree, that the 82nd is like a borderline between special ops and the regular Army. But once you're in special ops, it's like a different military altogether. A complete different mindset, a complete different way of doing things, and not one is better than the other. They each serve their role. But the problem is that one is the overarching mother of the whole thing, and you've got this little group inside of them that are getting all the funding and getting all the cool jobs and getting all this stuff. Oh, and by the way, allowed to pretty much do what they want and not follow regular standards in their opinion because they don't have an understanding of why the standards are changed. But that creates problems that we've got to deal with as guys in group. That, and it, being working with them, that you see that they are always being sharp shot by the regular military.
Right.
So we've got this fear of them coming down on us. You think about that. Now you don't want people to know you've got an issue because you don't want the regular Army to have any reason to think that you should be second guessed or taken out of your job because you've always been told by regular Army sergeant majors that you're a turd because you went somewhere where you could put your hands in your pockets.
Well, and I think that, and obviously, yes, there are those reasons for tactical separation, even strategic level separation. But I can see where some individuals would then take that and extrapolate that into mean, well, I just, psychologically separated. The fact that I don't need to tell you why I'm here right now also gives me the right of saying I don't need to tell you what I'm thinking. I don't need to tell you, and so it's taking that to the psychological place as much as the tactical and strategic place.
Right, right. Yeah. I mean, and that's so you start hearing, and if you're a listener right now and you're wondering why we keep just adding more and more things, you have to put it all together. It's a sum of a whole. All these things together are things that affect where this is going as a soft soldier with PTSD. Forget the stuff that's going to be, almost directly responsible for it, but all these secondary factors that lead you down a road of why am I not willing to ask for help? Because I've got too much stuff I'm responsible for to stop, and maybe I'll lose my job, or maybe I won't be able to do this anymore. And I love doing this. This is my life. This is everything about me. So I mean, there's all this is all just stuff that's building up to where it comes from that guys don't want to ask for help when they know they've got a problem.
So then you got to a point in your career in which the internal pressure of the what you were experiencing, PTSD or even sub-PTSD, some of the symptoms in PTSD were getting in the way, and then you were medically retired. Tell me a little bit about that process, receiving, of course, in the military and the Army, they call it behavioral health, but talking to mental health professionals while you're on active duty, the kind of decision to make that transition, and then to be medically retired.
Okay, so I get in 2009, in my last combat deployment, I got medically evacuated after an ambush, and I had gotten a back injury, a TBI, and was, TBI at the time was go right back home to the States. Now, I had enough of a TBI that I would have been sent home anyway. I mean, I couldn't be a speaker or be in the light because of the concussion I had. And I immediately started forgetting things, like almost, it was immediate notice of something's wrong. So I get sent home. Now, once I get sent home, I get put into the system to go through therapy and get everything done. And some of the therapists are saying, would you like to, go see mental health? Because you've had 6 deployments, you're doing a lot of high risk things. You've been doing this a long time. You never had a break. Do you want to get, and I'm like, no. And I wasn't picking up that they were seeing things that I wasn't. And finally I started to get like depression, because I kind of started to feel like I knew I was never going to get back. My back was just too far gone. The TBI was really a struggle to deal with, which I'm sure would, contributed to depression, but I didn't know where the depression was coming from. It would come on and off like nobody's business. And I'm talking about, you get home from somewhere and you go to the bathroom because you don't want to do it in front of anyone, and you sob like your wife just died for an hour. And it's like turns on, turns off. You walk out like nothing's wrong. And that happens every day. Mm-hmm. And there's no explanation for it. There's no trigger. There's no nothing. Then there's the inability to sleep, waking up with, the cold sweats, or because you had a bad dream. Now, me, unfortunately, I don't remember my dreams. So I can't tell you what I was dreaming about. I just know it wasn't pleasant. And then I had a friend of mine die, and it was done with. It went from inconvenient to unhandleable by me. I could not deal with it. I mean, I didn't go off the rails and go, off the farm crazy, but I went so far gone down depression and starting to, think I'm hearing stuff in the middle of the night, waking up and walking, just stuff that's what your mind starts to actually betray you, because you think something's happening that absolutely is not happening. And you're convinced of it because you don't know how to identify that it's just your mind playing tricks on you kind of thing, because you never had it before. And now you have it, but you know that you have good situation awareness, and your senses are acute because you've been trained for years to do it, and you're hearing something, so it wakes you up, and there's someone in the house because you heard it and woke you up. There's nothing there. So you don't realize where that's coming from. It all of a sudden starts, and you're so convinced of it that you don't know to say, oh, I'm just imagining it, and just go back to sleep. You start telling your wife, hey, there's someone in the house. So that's about like the 3rd time that happened. She's like, you need to go get help. And for me, now I am not the norm. That was all it took for me.
Right.
Because I've been married for 20 years to the same woman I got married to as a private, and nothing ever came before her. So when she said that, it was said with a tone of, you need to do this. Like, it's going to get bad, and she's got to protect the kids if I got way out of hand. Like I said, no violence, but it was scary, I'm sure, for her. It was scary for me. I know it was scary for her. She told me the message was received, went immediately the next day, and I was already starting to get shafted for my back and the TBI. Immediately went down there and asked to see a therapist.
And so I think in getting into that in a little bit, but you bring up a great point that a lot of veterans, although there's an internal awareness, it usually takes something external from them to help them take the next step. I say that it's usually people bringing something to your attention that you're already aware of. In a good sense, it might be a family member like your spouse or my wife or your dad saying, "Hey, son, we really need to talk," a brother, something like that. In a more extreme sense, it's going to be somebody like the cops or the courts or something like that saying there's something there. But I see this often that veterans will service members they'll wait until somebody tells them what they already know, and then it almost is, wait a minute, now it's obvious. I can't mask it anymore.
Exactly. And I think it has to come from someone you totally trust, someone that would never tell you something other than the truth. And that's part of my thing. Not to get offhand, but it's on us sometimes to help our brothers and sisters by being honest with them and not help them hide something that's wrong, because they need to hear it from someone they trust. Because I'm telling you, they're not going to admit that they have an issue until someone else lets them know that what they think may not be real is real, really happening. You really have PTSD. This isn't just like normal stuff. It is an issue. It's not going to go away. Matter of fact, it doesn't go away ever. You learn to cope and deal with it, but you don't get rid of it because it's a condition that you have earned over years of doing what you have to do. And so it got to come from someone that's trustworthy, someone that you're going to believe, and someone that you really know cares about you, because there's so many misconceptions about what going to therapy and getting help is going to do to you that you have to realize that if who else is under misconceptions of what everything's going on is saying you need this because I'm concerned, they're doing it because they want to save your life. So your life is in danger. PTSD is a medical emergency if it's not treated. I mean, and people have to get that through their head. It's not something that's going to go away, and it's never going to get better. And the longer it goes on, the longer you'll get disassociated from reality, and you'll never feel right. And what kind of a life is that? Yeah, it's just you're either going to be angry or depressed. They're really the only two things that you got left at that point.
And that's something that you bring up, and trust is an integral part of working with the mental health professional. It absolutely is. And sometimes at the moment when you need that trust the most, it is least there. And so would you say even the trust of hearing from someone that's necessary, that you should take that step? That's critical. So you went down, you had already started the medical process, and for physical concerns. Then you said you started working with somebody with behavioral health while you were still on active duty. How was that experience for you?
All right. So, and now here's where it's going to lead into my recovery journey, or not recovery, but my handling of it. I'm getting ready to go down to to Womack on Fort Bragg. And everyone that's ever been on Fort Bragg knows the 6th floor. The 6th floor is where behavioral health is in Womack. I know I'm going to the 6th floor to talk to this person, so I do not go in uniform. Mm-hmm. Why? Because I am ashamed of the fact that I'd be having my tab on, my Green Beret on, walking into the 6th floor. So I go up there with civilian clothes on. Now, yes, I could argue all day and lie to you and say I went in civilian clothes because I like to wear civilian clothes and not uniform, and it wouldn't be a lie. But for this, it would be a lie. Right. I purposely changed at work into civilian clothes to go to see them. So, point that comes very important later on. I get up there and I go through the process, and they assign me somebody, and they note, because they're very good at this. They see it all the time. They're like, we're going to have you go to one of the regular clinics and there'll be a person there you'll be meeting with daily, because they can already see I'm uncomfortable being on the 6th floor.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine. I go down there and I walk in to that therapy session with my very first therapist, and is a very, very nice lady. She's older. She's had, obviously was brought in from the government to work specifically this job, and everything she immediately starts going into the standardized. Well, let's talk about where you've been, what you've done, where are you from, your parents, and I stop her right there. I'm like, listen, like, you have to understand that I had baggage that existed before I had PTSD that I don't want you to take from me. I need that baggage to be the person I am. I just need you to get me back to the person I was when I became a Green Beret. I don't need anything else taken away. So don't ask me about my childhood. And I was confrontational with her and didn't know why. It was the first person that I was like belligerent with about this thing. Everyone else I was kind of keeping it quiet. Even my wife, I was conciliate. She told me something, I was just like, all right, I'll do it. I understand. I got to her and it was like, listen, don't fix me past where I'm still the guy that I was when I got, the person everyone likes. I need that guy. I don't want to be some random friggin' tree hugging, loving, feely, kind of creepy thing. I want to be that guy. And she's like, I don't know that guy. And I'm like, exactly. And that was the last time I saw her. I went back and said, I need a new therapist.
So what you're saying is, even though the brakes were worn and the rotors were grooved, you just wanted her to fix the engine. Leave all the other stuff that was broken before,
right,
the way it was broken before, because you knew how to operate the vehicle with those broken pieces.
Yes, and I operated it. I mean, to me, in my head, I'm thinking to myself, I was able to get my wife to marry me. I had kids that looked up to me and loved me. I had a great job where I was, if not, well known and well liked, at least I was there and not being a douchebag to everybody. I wanted to be that guy again. I didn't want anything fixed past that because I was afraid of what it would do to the dynamic of my life as I knew it in its best state. It's at the perfect time of my life. This is all the thing. I want to be that guy again. Not realizing at the time you're never going to be that guy again. Mm-hmm. But I put it on her because she said, I don't know who that guy is. And I was kind of like, well, how the hell are you going to get me back to that guy if you don't even understand what that guy is? And I just couldn't sit in the room with her anymore because I just don't think that I didn't feel like she understood what I was saying, because she normally is dealing with guys who are massively acute, have, like you said, done something where they've gotten themselves in trouble, or they're being violent or overly violent, or just can't handle the experiences of something that happened. I didn't have a moment that I got PTSD. My PTSD wasn't an event. My PTSD was a slow drive to a final destination. That was, it was over time. Small things built up. It
wasn't a dive into the pool. You gradually slipped into the pool.
Yes. And so I personally believe that there is a difference in the way that manifests PTSD for people. It's a common, you see this guy one day, this happens, then something happens the next day, he's a totally different guy. You can identify it. And normally it's so traumatic that they're off kilter and at that moment of explosion then. But with us, I was handling things and masking things for so long that when I finally had the one thing I couldn't handle, everything just overflowed. But it didn't overflow to the explosion point. It just was like filling a glass up with a slow trickle of water, and now it's just flowing over the top and it's covering the whole glass, right, and everything's wet. But it's not spilling all over the place. It's just building up everywhere around you.
So then you chose not to go back to that therapist, but it didn't turn you off from seeking therapy.
It also didn't help because it made me immediately guilty for making her the brunt of my, I'm trying to put the blame of what was going on with me on something. Mm-hmm. Didn't want to take responsibility for it myself because I didn't want to feel like a coward or feel like there was something wrong with me. So I didn't want to take responsibility for it. I wouldn't put it on the Army. I wouldn't put it on the Green Berets because I love them, and I wouldn't put it on my family because that's not fair to them. They got to put up enough with everything. Someone's got to get it. If I'm not going to put it on me and be self-destructive, which is some people do, I just put it on her. But I also knew that was wrong, and because I was having guilt issues and depression, it made it worse. So my first talk with him wasn't me opening up and making it worse. It was me stepping into the blame somebody else, project my feelings somewhere else, and then immediately like, man, why did I do that to that poor woman? So I couldn't face her again because of that. Also, I didn't think she was ever going to be able to help. And so I went back to him and said, look, I got to see somebody else.
Well, and that's an interesting aspect of what we do as mental health professionals. A lot of it is to be able to absorb a lot of that. You know, it puts me in mind of the difference between a casualty notification officer and a casualty assistance officer. You know, I don't know if you went through that kind of thing while you were in, but I did as far as the training. The casualty notification officer is the first one on the scene and notifies the family member of the loss.
Yeah, my opinion, the worst job in the military.
Right, but that individual is the voice of the Army and the Secretary of Defense and things like that, but that person gets the entire brunt of that individual grief. That cannot be the same person that walks that family member through all the other. So the casualty assistance officer is someone totally different. It's a difference between 1,000 pounds of grief in a small area versus a 1 pound of grief over a large spread over area, and it's two different things. And while you accurately recognize that's what I did with that particular therapist, that's what's good with those of us, those individuals that are familiar working with veterans, that we kind of expect that there is going to be this, walking in and unloading and, and just kind of being the target. And mental health professionals are trained to deal with that kind of stuff. But I think it was really good that you were able to recognize that. So you went back and you asked for somebody else.
Right. And so the next time they did not give me the opportunity to go to one of the satellite clinics. They just said, well, we'll have you meet here with Major so-and-so, whoever this guy was, who was he was a doctor. He was part of the medical corps. He was a psychiatrist. Let me rephrase. She was a psychologist. He was a psychiatrist. He talked to me, and he was everything that SF guys don't like about the Army. Wouldn't talk to me until I came in uniform. When he talked to me, he said there was things I would start to open up to him about, and he would stop me and warn me that I needed to make sure I didn't tell him anything that was illegal, I was like, what? And then he would just give me medicine and say, I'll see you in a month. Now, I don't know if anyone out there has ever taken some of these mental health medicines, but I personally believe they're overused and they're dangerous. And a good example is giving somebody something that just snows them and gives them, amplifies some of the symptoms that they're having worse. Never in my life have I ever thought about suicide until an hour after day 3 of taking this certain medicine. It dawned on, like, out of nowhere. I mean, the thought just came to me, and it passed as quick as it came. But I never took that medicine ever again, because I had already read that medicine had been contributing to people having these breaks where they were just going off and suiciding people. So being a former medic, I knew that if you identify a symptom that's a no-go, you immediately stop and reassess. I went right back to him, and he said, don't be so dramatic. And when he said that to me, I said, I want to go off post. I'm like, and I almost kind of blew up at him. I was like, sir, you have no idea, because you haven't asked me one question about what I do or where I've been. You just keep telling me that I need to make sure I follow the rules and make sure I don't, I self-identify that I'm going to be violent. He didn't talk about anything that was bothering me. Only what he tried to do was try to find out how to prevent me from having the symptoms. And it was all based on make sure you don't get yourself in trouble. And I was just like, I had it with him. I mean, I went from feeling bad about being at her to wishing I had gotten his ass more. And I won't say what his name was, but I mean, this guy almost completely ruined it. I almost walked out and never went back, and who knows what would have happened. But when I walked out, there was a doctor in the hallway bringing in a guy for a non-self referral, and that's when you get brought there from the unit and made to go see mental health. And he used to be an SF. He used to work with the SF guys. He sees me and he sees I'm frustrated, and he asks me what's going on, and he immediately goes to a computer and puts in a referral for me to go off post. and he puts in a certain guy's name. He's like, there's a guy I know. And that guy changed everything about my life at that point.
So, and I think this is sometimes indicative of what veterans think is going to happen, either at the VA or active duty service members. The assumption is they're going to get that stereotypical major that you're talking about, the psychiatrist that doesn't want to know anything and only wants to manage symptoms. I, as a master's level mental health professional, I don't prescribe. We don't have prescription ability. But the owner of our clinic here, he's a former chief of behavioral health, and he and I have talked about medications. They're good as far as they go, in that they provide a calm, stable place for someone to actually learn the skills to be able to manage things on their own. Dr. Weber, who I hope to have on an upcoming episode, will tell you that he tends to take soldiers and veterans off of medications rather than putting them on more medications, because that's what's going to be best in the long term. But your experience with the second therapist, number one, your experience with the first therapist, lay down on the couch, tell me about your mother, let's talk about your childhood, and the whole Sigmund Freud thing. Let's try to go deeper than maybe the individual's ready to go deep. That's a stereotype that people have about therapists. And then the second stereotype, or your second experience, is another stereotype that people have that would keep them from actually trying for that third time. So tell me a little bit about your third time with this one that you say he changed everything for you.
Right. There's something I forgot to mention that I just want to put out there. So between the first and second therapist, I started having these things where I'd wake up in the middle of the night with my heart pounding and I feeling like I was going to die. Mm-hmm. And that never happened before. Even when I was having the depression symptoms, it didn't happen. And I didn't know what was happening at all. I mean, there was fear there because I didn't know it was a body reaction I was having. Mm-hmm. And I know you're already in your head identifying that it was an anxiety attack, mm-hmm. and it was. And so I have these anxiety attacks that start and just get progressively worse as I'm going through this whole process, even though I already know that I am getting medically retired. I'm not fighting to try to get back on a team and get back to the fight. I've already consoled myself in a way to the process, even if I haven't consoled myself to the idea. But the process is going to happen. And I've made the decision to take it instead of taking COAD, which is continuation on active duty to my retirement date, because I couldn't sit there and not go and see guys go, and when I needed to move on in my life. And I was aware of it, so I took it. But it was not that was causing these anxiety attacks, which I still had not even realized were anxiety, because I didn't even get to the point where I could talk about those because the doctor never asked about them. Right. So I'm having these. I go off post. I walk in to a strip mall off of Bragg Boulevard, and around the back there's like a house.
I would say, was it next to a tattoo parlor, probably?
Well, yeah, it's Bragg Boulevard. Everything's next to a tattoo parlor and a strip bar.
And a strip bar. And a dry cleaner.
So I can get my uniform pressed, get a lap dance, get a new tattoo, and get my mind right, all in one strip mall. It seemed like heaven on earth to me.
And that's great, because because I could do all that stuff in the late 90s except for talk to a therapist. So at least I'm glad they added that last one on top of there. So that's
well, I mean, technically at that time you were getting most of your therapy by getting the strippers to talk to you. Right. So I mean, but they were untrained behavioral health people, so they weren't effective, but they were there. So I walk into this guy's office, and immediately when I walk in, he comes out, and he's a older gentleman wearing a sweater, and greets me with a smile, says that he's really happy to see me, says that he's really happy there's a Green Beret there. And he's like overly happy that I'm there. I'm like, I don't get what's going on with this guy. I walk into his office to sit down, and behind him on the wall is a Green Beret in a shadow case, a Yarborough knife in a display case, and then a photograph of him and Dick Meadows in Vietnam in 1969. And I'm like, and guys, Dick Meadows is like the man. He's one of the first Green Berets. He's there's a statue of him right outside. He's the guy. Yeah. So
it's
I'm
not
like
photoshopped or anything. It's like
no, this is his This is his commander of his SF team that he was an SF guy on. So he gets out of the military after being a Green Beret. He comes, and I can't remember his name, but I'm sure he doesn't have any. This isn't something that's a mystery, but he ended up like being one of the people that ran QVC. He had his psychology degree, and he was a licensed psychologist, but he was one of the corporate guys who ran QVC. And then 9/11 happened. He quit and came back to Fort Bragg to set up shop because he knew what was going to happen. Right. So that this is something I learned later on. How he came back for a reason, because he knew that he needed to do this, because he knew he was a Green Beret during Vietnam. He knew what our mindset was like. He knew how this was gonna. He knew also he was one of the guys that was like me, was smart enough to realize things before they were bad, and able to learn. And now he's helping people. So he sits there in 3-hour-long sessions, nothing about my experiences, nothing about going to war, nothing about my PTSD or what I'm feeling. All it was him telling me stories and me telling him stories about some of the heroes of SF and why SF is important and why we loved it and everything else like that. And finally, at the third session at the end, I'm like, Doc, what are we doing? I'm like, we haven't spoken a bit about PTSD. And he goes, you have anxiety attacks, don't you? And I'm like, yes. He goes, how many were you having before you started talking to me? And I realized at that moment that the anxiety attacks had completely almost gone away. They were still happening, but they weren't happening every day. Mm-hmm. And it was because he was building a level of trust, not in him and me, but just me trusting what's going on. I didn't go in there worrying about that I was going to have to talk about things I didn't want to talk about. I started worrying about that we weren't going to ever get to the things that I needed to talk about, because he wasn't talking about them. And he also identified with me directly by letting me know all these stories about how he was the same guy as the rest of us. And now he's here. He understands what we're saying when we say the things we're saying. Immediately once I realized that he was there because he understood who I wanted to get back to being, that was it. I had my moment. From that point forward, I was able to shed so much baggage with this guy, because then we started talking about things that within 6 months, he told me that I had everything I needed to not need care every week, then every month. And now I don't even go back. I haven't been back to see a person in years, because I know how to manage and how to take care of the different symptoms that I have. And he's also the one that explained to me what was really going on. And if you don't mind, I'd like to, we had that blog I put out about the cortisol thing. Once that was a realization to me that I think I was almost angry at the military for not making sure everyone understood this, what is really actually physiologically happening during PTSD and what it really is. Absolutely. And how the military has it's an enabler for what's happening with some of the things that it does.
And you reference your blog. I'm actually I'm going to put a link to the blog in the show notes, as much because it is a part of your story. But there is, as you reference, and it is going to be, and not more complicated than anybody can understand, but there is a physical impact of repeated exposure to trauma. Another guest that I'm going to have coming on, her name is Dr. Blair Cano. She is a Navy veteran, but she's also a psychologist and neurologist that can speak on the physical changes to the brain, the amygdala, the hippocampus, the limbic system, how the prefrontal lobe does not regulate the emotional centers of the brain, because we don't want that to happen. We don't want to have the prefrontal lobe kick in right before we go out the door of the airplane to say, this might not be something that's good for me. We want the prefrontal lobe to be disconnected.
Right. So, funny you mention her name, because I reference her specifically in that article.
Oh, well, good. I'll let her know that actually I talked to her a little earlier today. So
I read her study. It was pretty good.
Yeah. So so there is a lot of that, and I really appreciate the really you went through sort of the three different types of I guess mental health professionals. But let me ask you this, Jeff, and I don't want to run this too long as far as this episode, and as long as Eddie and Bennett will allow us to ride on their train, we'll definitely have opportunity to keep going. But Do you personally believe that a veteran can only see a mental health professional who is a veteran?
No. What see, every single individual is different. The point of my story, and that thank you for bringing it up because there is a point. The point is if you go to a therapist and they're just not what you need, it doesn't mean therapy is wrong. It just means that person is not. You have to have trust. You have to have some kind of rapport with them. You've got to believe that they understand you, or believe that they're trying to. And if you have issue and there's a need to move on, please don't keep moving on until you find the right one, because you will. You will find the right one. Apply your ability to not quit. Apply the thing that kept you from telling anyone you had PTSD. Apply that to not quitting the process, because it's not going to get better on its own, and you will find someone that gets you that feeling that you can trust them, and that they're not judging you. I mean, and there's all kinds of things that go into it, as you know. There's trust, the feeling of non-judgment, the feeling of safe, and all those therapeutic things that we don't want to hear about as Green Berets. We just want to hear just fix me. But we still need those. We're still human beings. We still have a way that the brain works, and a way that we transmit and process feelings that is similar, because we're all the same species. So you need to keep going. You need to drive on until you find the person that's going to help you, or the person that you're going to be able to let help you, really.
And I think that's instructive even for the audience of mental health professionals. The hope is that I'll have some colleagues that are interested in working with veterans that'll be listening to this, to understand that not every veteran is going to work closely. We all know that, I think, as mental health professionals, that it has to be the therapeutic alliance, the bond between the therapist and the client is going to be the strongest thing, and that's a two-way street. No, this has been great, Jeff. I really appreciate the time to kind of share your story, and it does take some courage. I know that the courage lies in the reason for the courage is to want to help veterans know more and kind of get over this. But it is still courageous enough to come out and say, yeah, these are the issues. This is what I experienced, and I've come out the other side. So
Right.
to wrap up, I'd like to give you the opportunity to, if anybody wants to find out more about what you're doing, or any projects that you have, please let them know. Twitter, Facebook, all that kind of stuff.
You can go onto Facebook and just search for Jeff Adamec, JeffAdamec, and find my page on Facebook. If you want to go on to Twitter, let me see if I make sure I say it absolutely correctly so I don't mess it up. My Twitter page for you to go to is, it's again, Jeff Adamec. It is at capital JEFF, capital ADAMEC. And you will see my face smiling with "Change Your POV" written underneath it. Go ahead and get on there and follow me. And I open up to the audience, anyone that has any questions or concerns, or even thinks that they may or may not need to be mentored or guided to know what the right answer is. I'm here for you guys. Reach out to me, because if guys like me can come to grips to get help that they need, you can do it too.
All right. Hey, I appreciate it. Thank you for coming on the Headspace and Timing. Glad to hear that your headspace and timing has finally been set pretty well. And audience, we will hear more next time. Thank you.